Now available in paperback and e-readers. E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a wicked werewolf in this action-packed all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman in paperback and e-readers today. Last week, the CW made a decision to cancel the brand new superhero drama, Naomi. Now, this Naomi drama is an adaptation of a comic book from DC Comics that was barely out for a year, and this comic book, which was created by Brian Michael Bendis, hasn't really sold very well with comic fans. However, this did not stop your Ava DuVernay and the CW from adapting Naomi into a television show, and this seems to be a major mistake on the part of the CW and Ava DuVernay. Now, the reason why I say it's a major mistake by the CW and Ava DuVernay is because the decision to adapt Naomi into a TV show was a major mistake, because you need to go out here and build an audience and a fan base for a character in a comic book before you take that comic book and bring it to television. Now, the Naomi character, when she first came to comics, was not very well received, and she never really got to build an audience over at DC Comics. Now, if you look at the Comic-Con sales for Naomi, the sales were really low, and the sales would not have warranted this character being given a television series, because usually in comic book adaptations, usually the marketing department and the research department, they're going to look at the numbers for that character before they go out here and greenlight them for a project. However, it seems the people at CW and Ava DuVernay thought they could go out here and force the Naomi character on viewers the same way DC Comics tried to force the character on readers. And they thought they could force this character on viewers, and they thought if they went out here and made the TV show based on this character, eventually the viewers would accept and like her. Unfortunately, audiences don't like it when you force characters on them. No, most viewers want to get to know a character, and that is the big problem with the Naomi character in both the comics and on television. The big problem with Naomi is that her story was extremely weak from the first page of her comic, and it seems like your Brian Michael Bendis was mostly focused on her race and her identity instead of focusing on things like her character and her voice. Now, the whole premise of Naomi is a very weak one. It's about a black girl who's been adopted by some white people, and this girl is trying to figure out if she's an alien from another planet, and she's trying to figure out who killed her parents and trying to discover what her powers are like. So it's like a mystery with a Superman edge. Unfortunately, the whole mystery gets lost because the Naomi character is really flat and one-dimensional, and because the character is extremely underdeveloped, it's hard to get to know the character and relate to her, and it's hard to care about the Naomi character. Now, I've read the Naomi comic, and the Naomi comic was really difficult to read because the character was so undefined and underdeveloped, and action moved so slowly due to the horrible Bendis story model. There really wasn't much for a production team to work with, and that's one of the problems with Naomi in trying to adapt it to television. There's a lot of flash as related to the gimmick of Naomi, but there's not much substance outside of the identity politics regarding race of Naomi just being a black girl, but there's no real story there that makes us care about Naomi as a character. And because there's no story there to make us care about Naomi, the problem is it would be hard to get into a Naomi show. Now, the main reason why it would be hard to get into a Naomi show, again, is because the source material does not have a very strong concept. The source material is just really slow and meandering, and this whole situation with the weak story is exacerbated because the person in charge, Ava DuVernay, really doesn't understand how the genre of fantasy and science fiction works. Yes, your Ava DuVernay does have a credit on her resume as related to A Wrinkle in Time, but the less said about A Wrinkle in Time, the better, because that was one of the worst projects your Ava DuVernay ever produced and directed. Now, your Ava DuVernay is very successful at making films like the Sally Richardson Whitfield film I Will Follow, a human drama, or something that's black historical like When They See Us, and films like Selma, which is a historical drama. She's good at black history dramas, but when it comes to black science fiction and black fantasy, this just is not her genre. This is just not her wheelhouse, and you need specialized skills to understand how black fantasy and black science fiction work. And your Ava DuVernay was just out of her depth on A Wrinkle in Time, and she was more out of her depth as related to Naomi, because Naomi had a lot of talking head scenes, a lot of very weak action, and if you're doing superhero action, you need to have action going on. You need to have a bad guy who is an antagonist we can connect and care about, and you need to have a conflict that is going to drive the story. The problems with your Naomi were all throughout this production beforehand, and the core issue was the source material. She got material from Brian Michael Bendis that was weak, and because she was in her emotions about, oh, this is a black heroine, that's all she focused on, and she really didn't focus on the more important components of a good fantasy show, which is the characters' powers, the characters' abilities, and most importantly, the characters' relationships with their family, friends, and especially their villains. There's a lot of components that go into a superhero show, and sadly, Naomi didn't have many of those components. And because Naomi didn't have many of those components, many viewers tuned out of Naomi right after the first episode, and the Naomi show started to drop in the ratings, and eventually would do worse than the CW's Batwoman. By the end of the run for Naomi, it was getting less views than Batwoman, and Batwoman was actually getting less views than most YouTube channels, and that is an embarrassment to the CW, which basically was spending $1 million or $3 million an episode for these superhero shows, and sadly, these superhero shows, in spite of their large budgets, they just weren't pulling in the money as related to ad revenue, and they weren't pulling in the viewers that would incentivize advertisers to continue keeping them on the air. That's one of the reasons why we saw this bloodbath as related to the CW. The CW's new owner, David Zaslav, was realizing he couldn't continue to spend money on these shows because these shows were costing him money. He was spending millions of dollars an episode on a netlit, and the shows just weren't pulling in the money. And like any good executive, he's looking out for the cost as related to the business. And this has some people wanting to play a race card, but in the case of Naomi, on the merits of the material just was not strong enough to warrant a renewal for a second season. The story by Brian Michael Bendis was already weak in the comic book world, and it should have never been greenlit for a project as I see it for a television show. Your Naomi overall was an absolutely terrible concept. It was just underdeveloped characters, underdeveloped story, and this was in the comics right now. The Naomi character is very flat and one dimensional. Her powers really aren't defined. She doesn't have a rogues gallery. She doesn't have anything there as a fan base. And what the CW thought they could do, and Warner Brothers at the time thought, was they were going to manufacture a character and a fan base, and that doesn't work in the world of fandom. No, in the world of fandom, people become fans of a character because they see things of substance in that character that they identify as related to their own personal lives, and they see stories that they relate to that's related to their own life experience. They just don't go out here and just become fans of a character because DC says so or Warner Brothers says so, and they don't become fans of a character because prominent names are attached to them. Yes, Brian Michael Bendis created Naomi, but Brian Michael Bendis hasn't been known for doing anything good since his run on the Avengers in the mid-2000s, and your Brian Michael Bendis has actually been on a creative decline ever since the mid-2000s. I mean, people look at his runs of more current work like Iron Man, more current work like your Superman, and the books are absolutely terrible. And the Bendis story model of stretching a story out for extended periods of time, this is something that many comic fans and TV producers frown on because it's just not something people want to sit there and deal with. People don't want to deal with your Bendis and his meandering storylines that practically go nowhere, and they don't want to deal with his one-dimensional flat characters that basically have no personality and no voice, similar to the Naomi character, who when I read her in the comics, really there was nothing there that I ever saw in black girls in my neighborhood, in my communities in the South Bronx, and I didn't see anything there that was relatable to her as a person. I really didn't see anything substantive as related to her character that was relatable to me as a black comic fan, and I really didn't see anything as related to that character that would make me care about her powers or her personality, because I've seen the whole adopted character done better by other writers, and I've also done my own fair share of characters like Eastine, who was an adopted character, who was the last survivor of an African nation, and then became adopted by the Egyptian gods, and eventually became a villain, then eventually later on in the John Haynes series became a heroine. There was a lot more substance to the Eastine character, I believed, than it was to this Naomi character, and there were a lot more compelling stories that I thought I could tell with a black character. Again, it's not about the color of the skin of the character, it's about the content of the character, and sadly the Naomi character did not have much substance to her character that made viewers care the same way it didn't make comic fans care, because most comic fans, they never were into Naomi, because many saw your Naomi the same way they saw Riri Williams. They saw her as a Mary Sue character, and they saw her as a Mary Sue character designed to be an avatar for Brian Michael Bendis' adopted black daughter, and sadly, that character, that's all she had was her race to be the main focus of her, but that wasn't something that would get readers to care about this character. So that's the main reason why the Naomi character failed to catch on with viewers. Viewers had nothing there of substance to get behind as related to the comic, and that's the reason why Naomi never built a fan base, and viewers never had a reason to care, because since there was no substance to the comic, they had no substance to really make them connect with the character. Now, your CW probably thought, oh, since Harley Quinn got popular because she was first seen on TV. But what they didn't understand was Harley Quinn was a very compelling character when she came on Batman the Animated Series, and Paul Dini and Bruce Timm gave her a very compelling backstory over time that made us relate to the character of Harley Quinn. But your Naomi didn't have any of these things. All she was basically a black version of a knockoff of Supergirl. But the whole thing is she didn't have any of Supergirl's substance, and she didn't really have things going on with her because the series just went on for an extended period of time. And again, your Ava DuVernay just wasn't the right person for this project. Yes, she has great work as related to movies for your historical films like When They See Us and Selma. Yes, she can do a good job on that type of film, but she really needs to stay away from fantasy and science fiction because she's making it harder for those who know the genre of fantasy and science fiction to get their projects out there. I mean, black creators out here, there are a lot of us out here like myself who know how the story model for fantasy and science fiction works. And sadly, every time Ava DuVernay comes out here and creates a failed project, it makes it harder for other creators to get their projects out there, and it makes it harder for those good projects to get greenlit. There's a lot of great projects and stories out there, and those creators, they get hindered because your Ava DuVernay uses her clout to create projects that really have no substance to them and prevents those other creators from getting to the marketplace. That's the big problem with your Ava DuVernay as related to black science fiction and fantasy. She is creating a thing that's impeding the progress of black science fiction and fantasy because black science fiction and fantasy is a growing and emerging market. And after the success of Black Panther, we see that there is an audience for black science fiction and fantasy. But sadly, for every Batwoman and every Naomi that's out here, that makes it that much harder for us to really prove that there is a market out there. But there are fans out here who want good black fantasy, want good black science fiction, and they want to see seasoned professionals who know the genre working on the genre. But they can't. But a lot of those creators like myself, we wind up hindered because a studio executive is going to say, "Hey, why should I go out here and finance a black science fiction project like an ISIS or John Haynes or other good independent concepts I've seen like Holt and many others out there by black creators? Why should I finance things like your other projects like ISIS or John Haynes or Concrete Comics Absolver or Acolyte or other characters? Why should I finance those characters? Because every time there's a Naomi, it always fails. I mean, that's the thing that frustrates a lot of black creators because there's good material out there, but because you have people like Ava DuVernay making projects, what they do is they make it where these executives see these failures and those projects cannot get greenlit and those projects can't get distributed because they see this woman failing. And this woman, again, she's failing by design because some people put her in place because they know that she's inexperienced as related to how fantasy works. But there are professionals like myself who know how it works, know how the story model works, and we know from the beginning, reading Naomi, it was destined to fail, and it was destined to fail because basically your DC Comics violated the rules and Warner Brothers violated the rules as related to building a character's fan base, building a character's audience. You need to give readers and viewers time to get to know a character because fans don't like it when you force a character on them, tell them it's a superhero, and then tell them that this is the superhero they need to watch. Now, this, I believe, is deliberately done by design because there are forces trying to sabotage the growing black fantasy and black science fiction market. They want shows like Naomi to fail because they don't want to see that market grow. They saw how Black Panther made over $1 billion. They know that there's an audience out there when they see people like the producers of Black Sands getting a $500,000 investment from people like Kevin Hart. There's an audience for Black fantasy, and I'm hoping that this does not discourage other Black creators out there, because there is a market for their products, and the market is clearly saying, we don't want characters like Naomi. No, we want characters like Black Sands. We want characters like John Haynes. We want characters that are of substance from Black creators to Black audiences, and we want really good stories for Black fantasy. Now, your Naomi again got canceled by the CW because of the content of her character and the fact that she had no content of her character outside of the color of her skin, and sadly that wasn't enough for her to build an audience, because she had no substance to her character that made viewers care about her character. I saw the end for Naomi when they first said that they were going to make this into a series, because there was nothing there to make a series out of. And sadly, the CW has said enough is enough as related to these kinds of characters and this kind of storytelling, and that's why we're seeing a complete purge of these kind of stories, because your David Zaslav is saying enough is enough as related to these kinds of shows and spending money on them, because these kind of shows, yes, they are all about trying to push identity politics, but the whole thing is they don't really give you any sort of character to care about in the hour that they're on the air. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my positive Black fiction on the SJS Direct imprints featuring Black heroines and heroes like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them on Smashwares, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. Sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.